my name is Major Mike Webb, and at least according to Attorney General Merrick Garland, I am what he would describe as a litigation hobbyist, probably because I am not an attorney. But over the past few years, I have brought several cases into the courts, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Two communities that had been adversely impacted by the pandemic were places of worship, which had been closed, and people of color, which found Latinos by proportion suffering the most infections, and blacks who, before the first anniversary of the pandemic declaration, had accounted for around 15% of the fatalities in America, dying at 1.4 times the rate of whites. And two cases that I have brought to the courts on what is described as a petition for writ of mandamus have involved these two adversely impacted communities and have attempted to convene a grand jury investigation. And this is just a status update on those cases, one of which appears to be moving towards a trial very soon, and tellingly, none of this has been reported ever in the press. The death of Bishop Gerald Glenn to COVID-19 had made national headlines when he had died the day before Easter at the beginning of the pandemic. And curiously, he had died along with 30 other black Pentecostal bishops, which appeared for a moment as a headline and then was quickly forgotten. The deaths of a few thoroughbred horses before the 149th running of the Kentucky Derby was sufficient to prompt a cancellation of racing at Churchill Downs and to commence an investigation. A call that has not even come from social justice ministers who marched for various causes during a pandemic. But when a case to demand a grand jury investigation into the death of Bishop Glenn had been certified to the Chief Justice for the Virginia State Supreme Court on September 28, 2022, there was not even a mention in the press, which should raise at least some suspicion as to why. That case had a retired jurist appointed to preside over the case on November 4th, 2022, while most eyes were more focused on elections, especially in Georgia, and did not go to a hearing where the case was dismissed until March 24, 2023. And that matter is now on appeal to the Virginia State Supreme Court, and all without even one mention in the press. Perhaps that was the one black life in pandemic that didn't matter. However, the case currently making some progress in the courts is drawn from a story that had appeared in the Washington Post in August 2020 regarding the infections of the Graveson family around the first Mother's Day during the pandemic declaration, infections that would result in the hospitalization of both of their sons. And it also involves the infection of their pastor and his wife in January 2021, still during the period of the first variant to hit the United States, since the dreaded Delta variant would not arrive until April 2021. And so all of these cases, especially biometrics, are dealing with the very same variant of COVID-19 that had begun the outbreak in China in December 2019. By March 22nd, 2020, when Bishop Glenn had his controversial worship service in Chesterfield, in which he had preached against the dreaded coronavirus, First Baptist Church of Alexandria had, like just about every other church in Alexandria, already canceled in-person worship. And most of the churches in Alexandria had closed their doors on March 14th, 2020, one day before the first reported fatality. And one day before Virginia Governor Ralph Northam would begin the lockdown of the entire state, canceling large non-essential gatherings of 100 persons or more, because of only a total of 45 cases in the entire state. On August 14th, we shall be going into pre-trial conference with the judge at the Alexandria Circuit Court and the Commonwealth Attorney Brian Porter to discuss the current status of this case and to discuss what a trial would look like in this case, which would include testimony from witnesses, and our theory of the case proceeds from the established fact that the first variant of COVID-19 had been determined in two credible bookend studies to possess a secondary attack rate of less than 5%, which is at least 12 times too low to be described as a highly contagious disease, as it had been described by the former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, who we shall be calling as a witness to testify to give him an opportunity of his right to explain the guidance that he had provided to residents of Virginia that had not been supported by the scientific assessments of the risk of this virus, which clearly displayed a virus with essentially a Harvard acceptance rate by secondary attack rate, and about which even the WHO, after completing their robust investigation in China in February 2020, had concluded that it is not clear whether this even correlates with the presence of an infectious virus at all. Since Pastor Don Davidson at First Baptist Church of Alexandria had been a prominent faith leader who had members of his church infected and had been infected himself, we shall be calling him as a witness to speak for himself and for the faith community in Alexandria regarding their concerns, their fears, their experiences, and the guidance upon which they had relied from government authorities, perhaps in detrimental reliance, a required finding for fraud. We shall be calling as a witness Pastor Howard John Wesley, the senior pastor from the Albert Street Baptist Church, the largest black Protestant faith denomination church in Northern Virginia, which had not only closed, but also, like many black Protestant churches, had remained closed to in-person worship, even long after many other churches had returned to in-person worship, and was one of many that decided that they had to go to a vaccines-only policy for in-person worship. At Albert Street, at least, recently terminated, or at least suspended. And it is clear on the evidence that all of these persons of color had been placed in a reasonable apprehension of death or grave bodily harm, a required finding for extortion. In addition to the former governor, we shall be calling as witnesses several others, to include the mayor of Alexandria, Justin Wilson, Dr. Muhammad Norman Oliver, the former state health commissioner, Dr. Lindsay C. Marr of Virginia Tech, who by July 2020 had argued that the virus had been primarily transmitted by aerosols and not droplets, as had been the original guidance, which changes many of the ways in which persons should be advised to protect themselves from a virus. And most importantly, we shall be calling as a witness the Commonwealth Attorney, Brian Porter, who has refused even to investigate this matter on a claim of prosecutorial discretion. Or essentially, it is his belief that he is free to investigate whatever he wants to and is not accountable to anyone regarding that decision, which is not entirely correct under the law. Under the law, when anything shocks the public conscience, not even a claim of sovereign immunity can override that call from the people that the justice system is supposed to serve. But also, if it can be established that a prosecutor had an illegitimate motive for refusing to investigate a matter, a claim of prosecutorial discretion under the law will fail. And so this should be a very interesting case to follow, and it is of note that to date, it has not even ever been mentioned in the press. This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest.